Welcome back. Another episode with Chris talking about history, which is relevant also today, and see what kind of lessons we can learn and what kind of discussions we can have around today and the history. So I will give it to you, Chris.
Right, okay. Great to see you again, Remo. We've not spoken since literally Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
I, I will, and if I give a slight intro,
Yeah.
we've 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 talked about the Baltic Battalion in bits and pieces. I've been careful not to talk about it in depth because I felt one day there would be an opportunity to talk about it completely because it is quite a complex subject,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually not only of historical importance to Estonia and the Baltics. It's actually very important to what could have been and about all the good things that happened and some of the poor decisions that were made that ultimately doomed the project. And I don't think anybody really knows about it because the Baltic Battalion became a dirty word which you couldn't even use. Now, some of the things I talk about are also in retrospect that I learned many years later talking to people which I didn't fully understand at the time. So now the combination of actually living the experience from the beginning and from many periods later meeting people who became big friends who were sometimes not so big, they told me things which I didn't know about. So I'll start by saying that the Baltic Battalion so far at the stages of 1995 when we've talked about this we had trained the trainers and the project which was started by the Danish. The feedback I got later was that they didn't expect the project to survive, and they were actually quite amazed that we'd reached such a stage and it was so successful. Me being me, I just thought at the time myself that I did my job, and of course it's successful. It's what I'm paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back on it, these were guys who were many had been former Soviet soldiers and officers who didn't speak English. We had no equipment and we had an infrastructure that was being destroyed by the Soviets themselves when they left the Baltic states. So perhaps it was fortunate that I didn't really comprehend that at the time and just went for it. I have to admit though, as I got into this, I actually quite enjoyed the challenge of all these which these things presented. So, yeah, it has been a success. All the guys have been trained, or we're nearing completion of training, because we've not done the final exercise yet. But so far, so good. And the weather, of course, also was absolutely fantastic. And that was one of the best summers that I've actually experienced in the Baltic states. It was beautiful sunshine every day for 6 months. It was fantastic. Excuse me. So towards the end of the course, which was finishing end of September, we've now got to August. I think it was actually during the time when the guys actually went on leave. And this gave us an opportunity to actually start to do reconnaissance in our various places. So I, of course, went to Estonia. I was told that I was going to a former Soviet submarine base. Um, and I didn't have a clue what to expect. But the first thing we did was we actually travelled to Tallinn. And we actually stayed in what I think it's now called the Park Hotel.
Mm.
Um, my impressions of Estonia were that it was slightly ahead of, if not more so, than Latvia. And I'll give one prime example in attitudes. In Latvia, we had a red Land Rover, and it was obviously a very prominent vehicle, and we would continually be stopped by the Latvian police and fined, and it would be any excuse, and we would just pay the 5 lats just to send them on their way because it was such a problem. But we were being targeted for no reason, but we just took it on the chin. Okay, so be it. I do feel though that at that time though they were behaving how they behaved during Soviet times.
Mm-hmm.
Especially on Fridays was the worst day. They needed money for the weekend, and we actually got stopped in Estonia because our headlights were not on, and we didn't know that during daylight hours then in Estonia, it did change in Latvia later, you had to have headlights on. So we were stopped, and the policeman informed us of this. He understood it was basically just our ignorance, and now we knew, okay, you've been told, don't do it again. And he got in his car and left.
Mm-hmm.
And that made a distinct impression upon me. I thought, that's professional. I like that. So we're going to get briefed by the Estonian element first. And the place we went to, which I now understand is now the Signals Battalion, which is the old barrack buildings, which I quite like, opposite the EDF headquarters. So we sat there and we met, Colonel Tyrrell. Tiru, I think's the best pronunciation. He's dead now, rest in peace. Really nice guy. He actually reminded me of an English gentleman. I was quite impressed. And he was, I thought, an ideal LO type of person. He was a really nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he's giving us a lecture or brief on the infrastructure and the plan for our camp, and also the EDF, how they were going to train. So we had a map of Paldiski, and there was great view foils. Yeah, this was pre-computer times. There was the view foils up, of these building plans, and it went something like this. Now, as you enter Paldiski, as you go past what's now was the Scout Battalion,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they've knocked it down now, but there was a massive building that was a former, which was in the Soviet time, the biggest submarine training school in the Soviet bloc. And it was a massive building. And this building was going to be used to house all the conscripts. And that training would be done centrally within Paldiski. And I thought, yeah, that's really good. Because our Commando Training Centre, as I've mentioned before, actually works along very similar lines. We get everybody together, from, as I said before, from recruits to NCOs to officers to different skills and organisations. And we train in one organisation. And I know that leads to a great standards, and we can see everybody else training. So I thought, oh, that's good. And as I later found out when I travelled around Paldiski, I thought this will work because of all the land around the town which was not being used. I thought, yeah, great, you've got a really great facility to house all the conscripts for their initial training, and then they can go straight out into the training areas. And I would imagine, I think there's enough space to do it.
Mm.
And that would make sense because I think during the height of the Soviet time they had 10,000 troops in Paldiski.
Mm.
They had parachute battalions and all sorts there. So yeah, I thought great, and we were then given a talk about where we're going to live, which I now know is Pakri 4. And yet again, we've got great apartments. That's looking good. And the accommodation for the training team, the Estonian training team of 30 odd guys, the platoon, yeah, great. So everything is great at this stage, and I'm impressed with the brief. The one thing that mystified me at the time was, or you could call a red flag, was that some of the things that were being talked about were not on my map. And I thought, have I forgotten how to map read? No. Yeah, so I thought, I'm not. When we got asked any questions, I thought, although you could argue I should have done, I thought, no, we go to Paldiski and I'll correct my error of not identifying something. But when we got to Paldiski, it wasn't there. And I used the accommodation, for example. Pakri 4 was there as a building, except it was destroyed.
Mm.
The accommodation that the Estonians had been promised, and bearing in mind they're the first professional paid soldiers who expect and have been promised a certain standard of living and work. Nothing done. There was a building, but it was in poor condition. This massive building, and it might have been nicknamed the Octagon or something like this, that was there. I thought, okay. So yet again, I always remain optimistic, and ignored it and thought, no, it's okay, they're going to build it. I mean, I must have been out of my mind. There's just no way you can just suddenly build this in 2 or 3 months, you know. So I was shown my accommodation. So I think this illustrates much, and it was a destroyed apartment. And I mean, I'm talking it was a 1-bedroom apartment. The toilet and sink were just hanging off the walls, smashed. The kitchen was just wires.
Mm.
The other room was just bare paint stripped. No heating, no electricity, no nothing. But you know what? I've lived in it's still got a roof. So I said to my boss, look, I'll get a camp bed, I'll get a lamp, we can kerosene lamp or something, and I'll just get on with it. And he said to me, no. He said, we've not signed up to this. Okay. Now, you know yourself, you as a soldier, you just get on with what you got. But my boss understood it wasn't about our team or myself. It was about we may put up with it, but others won't.
Mm.
And of course, there was also what was called North Camp then, which you might know is what was the Scout Battalion. Well, it was called North Camp then. And when we went to visit North Camp, there was the barracks we were meant to use for the soldiers themselves were going to be bought in, and by that I mean the actual company to be trained. And one of those guys is now the chod. Nothing had been done again, and it was a mess. And they were not expecting us. So when we went to examine it, one of the rooms was being used to house the guard, and they were not living in very good conditions. So it was quite gagging. It was quite, we could smell it. Didn't smell good. It wasn't a good introduction to what was meant to have been done. But as I say, at the time, I just thought, okay, I'm a raw marine. You get on with it, Mm-hmm. But my boss obviously is looking at another bigger picture, because you need an infrastructure to train from, especially if you're going to train 100 people who are volunteers. And we'll just say, this is worse than my conscript conditions, which were nowhere near as good as they are nowadays. They're just going to say, no, I'm not going to fulfill the contract because you've broken it. So they'd walk out. So I was fascinated by this, took it on the chin, and we went back to the Park Hotel, had a night there, and next morning my boss went to see the chod. And that was General Einsel. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Einsel, who was actually a former American Green Beret.
Yep.
And it's funny, as I woke up this morning, and obviously because I'm thinking about this, mm-hmm. I thought he was a Green Beret. He should have really got this. Mm-hmm. And he didn't. Now, my boss told me later that when he went to see him and explained what he'd seen the day before, the answer he got was...
What was the message he took it to him?
He went to see him and he explained what he'd seen and explained what problems it would cause. Mm-hmm. For example, guys... And actually, our instructors, the people we had trained, mm-hmm. would have said, no, I'm leaving, I'm going. So everything we'd done over the last, 10 months would have been wasted. And they would have gone. Because they'd been promised much at the start of this project, and nothing had been done. Mm. So the initial reaction from... the chod was, hey, you a pussy? Basically saying that, my boss and our team are wimps and we just can't put up with a few uncomfortable situations. As I said, it wasn't about us, it was about an organisation that had to run efficiently with at least some standard of structure. So my boss said to him, without getting flustered or trying to argue the comment, he said he just smiled at him and said, well, you've signed an MOU and you've not fulfilled it. And if you don't fulfill the MOU, the Baltic Battalion will fail and it's Estonia's fault. And I think that was the end of the discussion. So when he went back next day to meet the chod again, his attitude changed. And now he promised that he would rectify the situation. Okay. And I learnt this over a beer with the boss who explained to me what had gone on,
Mm-hmm. What was the rank of your boss at that time? He was
Lieutenant Colonel. Mm. and he was a mountain leader. I mean, this guy's he's a real ninja, you know. He's just, yeah, okay, I'm a pussy. Yeah, next question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if anybody says to me, "Are you a pussy?" I just go, "Meow." You a man or a mouse? Got some cheese? I mean, it means nothing to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, get a life, buddy. But I didn't understand at the time this situation. I saw it, but I couldn't really register it. Later on in my career, when I changed uniforms and also on loan service to the Estonian Army, all these bizarre situations became more understandable. Yeah, I didn't understand at the time. So we went back to Latvia. I quite enjoyed it. I thought Estonia was a really nice place. I thought the Estonians I met were really nice people. I thought Paldiski, even in that condition, I loved it. I just loved it. There was something about it I just loved. I think because it was a former Soviet sub base and it was so unique, and I knew that only a few years ago, if I'd been there, I could have been in deep trouble, you know. So I found it fascinating. So I thought this is what I joined up for.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't worry so much. I didn't worry about the infrastructure. That's not my problem to solve. And I don't worry about things that I can't solve. There's no point. It just drives you crazy. So I thought, okay, that's my boss's problem, you know.
But I mean, yeah,
So
if you go to like Afghanistan, I mean, just you figure it out. Like if there's
yeah,
no infrastructure, it is what it is.
you just get on with it. It's nothing. There's no other. There's now, of course, if there'd been no MOU, and this is what we signed up for, was just go there and make it happen, we'd have just done that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they'd left, well, so be it. I mean, that's beyond our control.
Yeah.
But so yeah, my big takeaway, which I learnt later or understood later, was how important MOUs are. Because this wasn't for the chod to decide yes or no. This was at very high governmental levels. This was right at the top. And also, I think I'm right in saying this, that the military doesn't tell the MOD what to do. The MOD tells the army what to do.
That's how it is.
In the chain of command, you know.
Yep. It's under the defense ministry.
Yeah, so
It's a sub organization.
Even if you're the chod, there's always somebody who's above you.
Yep.
So we went back to Paldiski, and we've now got the final exercise to do. That went well, although, yeah, I'm going to say it. We had a notional boss on my team who was a Finnish officer. And as a personality, he was a great lad. He was great company. But, you know, through no fault of his own, up until now, he didn't really have much to do. Because we're teaching British infantry tactics. I'm being generous here. So we just get on with it, and you can just, you know, be there as a shoulder to cry on, or we need something, we go to you and say, but this has gone wrong, you know, you're the boss, go and sort it out. But he also spoke Russian, so he was a great asset. So he was really being used by our boss as a liaison officer, really. Well, that's good. Oh, fine, you know, great, you know. As I said, it was a joint project, so he found his niche, which really was the liaison officer, and of course Russian was a massive common language then. So he was very useful. But the one military task that he'd been given during that period was to organise the final exercise, and he didn't do it. And it got given to me at short notice. And at that time, we were also down an instructor on the team who'd been promised that if his wife had the baby, he could go back for the birth, and that's what happened. I was also told to prepare the training program and other things for the task ahead in Paldiski. So I was not only on the ground with the final exercise, but I had to organise it and fill in the space of instructor down. And okay, so be it. But what I took umbrage over was that he was giving an easy task to do to cover his backside, which was to go to Poland and pick up ammunition. It needed to be done. Great. But when he left me, he laughed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha, you've got to do it, not me." Now, if I'd been in his shoes, I'd have been so embarrassed, and I would have explained to the person who now has to take over my job, "Thank you very much. One day I'll try and pay you back, or make up for it in some way, and I apologise deeply. I just couldn't get to grips with it." And I'd go, "Yeah, okay. I just wish you had talked to me earlier, and I could have, done it in slow time over months.
Mm-hmm.
But you should have come to me." But when he left, and he laughed in my face, thinking, "Ha ha, you've got to do it now," I was not happy about that, and I lost all respect for him then. Yeah. So So apart from that, though, we did the final exercise. It was a great success, and we finished it. We had the final parade. Everybody's in high spirits, and we all then had sort of like a pack up week.
How did you feel when you were on the parade? Like, did you feel like it's done now, or did you feel like accomplished something? Like,
we also had a series of intersection competitions, which my section won, so I was really pleased about that.
mm-hmm.
And of course, yes, everybody was very pleased. But everything that had been happening so far, we never quite knew the end state.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, we were meant to leave in May of that year, and now it's the end of September, and I'm going to Paldiski. So I don't think anybody really understood how this was going to work out. And that's why it leads to me to say that although these MOUs had been done I think somebody saw the opportunity to get the foot in the door and went for it, which totally makes sense to me. I do understand that. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And now actually it's really working. It's working really well. It's worked. It has worked. And of course, the other things which I didn't understand then were that the Baltic states, this was also politically meant to help the Baltic states to become united, for want of a better word, and to start their joint cooperation no longer under the guise of the Soviet Union. So that was also a great success. And we did have dignitaries and all the rest of it, and the weather was fantastic still. So yeah, of course, everybody finished on a high. It was a tremendous experience. I really enjoyed it. I thought, this is great. This is marvelous. We've really done a lot. Everybody knew that they'd achieved something. I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody felt I'd learnt a lot. I know that the people we trained, and many years later, always people would say to me, although the training was tough, they said, that was the best experience I ever had in the military in my entire career. I took that as a great compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what, I do want people to enjoy themselves, and even though it may not be particularly enjoyable at the time, at the end of it though, you go, yeah, that was really worth it. And I do know from a weekly basis, when the guys would go back on the bus to Estonia for the weekend, they always felt on a high, which we talked about before. So far, so good. The guys are in great spirits. Yep, we've achieved our aim. Now, whilst I talked about the infrastructure that I saw in Estonia, the infrastructure when we first went to Ojaste in Latvia was just the same. And I think this is why I wasn't intimidated by it. And I thought, you know what, somehow they're going to pull the rabbit out of the bag, you know. So I think that's why it didn't intimidate me, because now I think about it, the barracks, and I'll send you some pictures of this. The barracks were destroyed and all the rest of it, and they rebuilt it to a satisfactory standard, which we could cope with. So, and the good thing about Ojaste was it had a great training area. So yeah, that's why I wasn't intimidated.
Yeah,
so yeah, all was good. Yeah, all was good, and yeah, great. I had at this stage. I've got to mention that there was a change in the command structure, because there was 3 of us on each team, and now it had been downsized to 1. So the team was the trainers, and now the 1 became the supervisor. So we went from 9 senior NCOs to 3. So one to each Baltic country. Our boss stayed, and our sergeant major stayed. So that's the headquarter element. Of course, there was the Nordic element, which I sometimes, forget about. They as I said, up until the final exercise, it was a really happy team, and the Nordics had their administrative jobs to do, and they all had a task to do, like the quartermaster and the technical guy. It's great. No problem. It's great. But the Nordic part of the team was now going to evolve into the trainers of the battalion staff, and this was to gradually evolve over some time, and also get bigger. The Nordic element was also going to get a lot bigger because of this. So they were going to get bigger, and we got smaller. This would lead to a problem later on, which I won't talk about now. So, we travelled to. I know the day I travelled to Paldiski because it was my birthday, and it was a.
So this is right after the graduation.
No, we had like a packing week, we had a week for administration, because
Yep.
I don't remember too much about it because it's like such a boring sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
The Estonians did their packing, we did our packing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got a new guy with me called Otto. I won't use his surname. A Finnish major. Great guy, loved him. Great guy, and he was a lot older. He was older actually than this other one,
Mm-hmm.
and he was definitely what I called old school, and we were definitely more on the same wavelength. Yet again, unfortunately, he couldn't really get involved in the training aspects because it wasn't his forte. But he was a great sort of someone to lean on in times of crisis to say, Otto, what do you think? And it go, yes, Chris, good idea. Okay, Otto, let's do it. You know, it's great. So no problems. He was a great ally. Although he'd often say to me, Chris, what can I do? I said, it's okay, Otto. Not your problem, mate. Just, you know. But no, I really liked him.
Did it ever come up with any of the Nordic guys that you guys had actually been in war, and nobody else haven't in Europe really?
Okay, I can tell you a funny story about this. Now, yet again, I've got to be careful how I say this. I don't care if you've been in war. I'm not going to make any judgment calls. Oh, you've not been in war. You're not a real soldier, or you haven't got the experience. Because when you go to war, guess what? For the first time, I've never been to war before, but I've been training for war. And if training's good, you just get into the groove. And just because you've been to war, you could still be a bad soldier. So I'm not gonna. I don't hold any store or judge people by you have or haven't. My only qualifying statement on that is I'm glad that I've been to war and seen some things because I felt it gave me confidence, especially in later life, to teach things when people are fighting me not to do it. And I really know why you must do this. It may seem boring, it may seem drudgery. You've got to do it. You've got to understand why you do this. So I'm glad I experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't judge anybody by it. So it was something that it's quite a good question, that, because it's something that I never really thought about. But when I was in Paldiski later on, a Swedish excuse me, because of my past cold and stuff and cough, I'm just going to have one of these sweets.
Yep.
We actually had a visitor. He was a Swedish captain, and we actually took him for a drink in one of the local Russian bars. And that's another story, those Russian bars were crazy, man. And so we're having a beer, or maybe a vodka actually, and he said to me, you've been on a NATO mission or UN tour? I think it was a UN tour. And I actually felt I haven't. No. No. I was quite proud of that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time, these UN missions most of them were fairly quite soft, so we didn't get used. So he said to me, hey, have you been on UN missions? I said no. And I could see him pump himself up, Now Otto is starting to understand me now. So Otto realised, I could see him go, oh my God, So this guy started to tell me about all the hardships he went on in his particular mission. And he said, yeah, it was really tough. He said the hotel wasn't very good. I then let loose with a barrage, which shot him down. And Otto was just laughing. But so he held store in all this, so he was going to make a judgment call on my capabilities based on have I been on a UN mission. So I'm glad actually that I learned early on, obviously from my more, because you do learn from your surroundings. And when I joined up, everybody had been somewhere. I mean, the older guys had been in Malaya, they'd been in Aden, the RSM had been in Korea. So if you had people trying to tell war stories to big themselves up, there'd be massive punch-ups because I did this, no I did this, no I did this. It'd be farcical. So what I found, it was the opposite. Nobody talked about it. And nobody made a judgment. And in fact, they'd say, don't worry, you get your turn. Because everything, every 7 years, something kicks off. So if you stay in the Corps, don't worry, you get, and that's what I used to say to my guys. What was it like? I said, don't worry, you get your turn. And I got told that actually by a guy who joined the troop after the Falklands, and he started to ask me about the Falklands, and I didn't want to talk about it. I just said to him, don't worry, you get your turn. He did actually. He lost his leg in Iraq. But he did. But we talked, via this means, and he was laughing about it. He said you were right. So, yeah, I don't make any judgment calls by this, which I think is a good thing actually.
I think it's the right way, and I think it comes from the people who have been there. I think if it's a kind of the reverse, then you are going to make a judgment even if you don't want to, because if other person has an experience, you're going to hold them on a different place, I would say.
But that said, though, I do respect people's service and what they've done. So I do respect that. So if the guy said he was in Afghanistan, yeah, I respect that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you have been or not. Like, you're still serving, and you're up for it. That's the logic.
And I do see on some forums actually with guys now who've like left the army and they had the experience of Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're now belittling people who've got no medals. Well, so what? It's not their fault.
Yeah.
Because you know what? If a war kicked off, that guy might be a guy who wins a VC. You don't know. So no, I'm and as I said before, my father said to me, many people who deserve medals never get seen. So you know what you did, that has to be enough. And I think that's a great statement. That's a really great statement that my dad made. So no, I didn't judge anybody by this, but they actually judged me by the sounds of it,
Sure.
Yeah, it was.
It just backfired.
And of course, yeah, it did backfire. And of course, the other time when I told you about when that quartermaster tried to win sympathy from me by explaining that guys were committing suicide after the event. Didn't go down well with me. That it was a silly comment to make, Yeah, guys do commit suicide, but he was boasting about it in such a way as if they would died storming a defensive position, and he was also trying to get a sort of reflected glory from people killing themselves. I really didn't like that. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Where was I? So we've now going back to Paldiski, and we'll tell one funny story though about this. We had a Norwegian Veltwagen, and the back door kept on opening every 1 or 2 kilometres, and I couldn't hold it from the inside because the vehicle was so full of equipment. So every couple of kilometres I have to stop the vehicle, jump out and close the door. So it took 11 hours to drive from Ojaste to Paldiski, and we didn't arrive until late at night. And guess what? Nothing had been done.
How did that feel now?
I said to myself, happy birthday. Now, what they did was they had to open up, there's a sports hotel in Laulismar.
Mm.
I could never say that word before. Laulismar. that was really hard to say once upon a time. And they had to open it up for us, and there was no hot water, there was no heating, and no electricity. But there was a bed, and I sat on that. I sat on that bed that night, and again, this is why you develop a dark humour in the military, in particular. I found it funny. I just laughed and just said to myself, "Happy birthday," and went to bed. And I'm laughing now because I think it is funny, actually. And I won't forget that. That's why I'll never forget the day I went to Paldiski. And the accommodation that was for the instructors was not suitable. They'd not fulfilled their promise. So what I had to do was actually open up this. I think it was some sort of sports hotel in Laulismar, and they had to then rent it. And actual fact, it was a good accommodation. So now the lads are put up at obviously great expense in temporary accommodation, but accommodation that is built for civilians, with a bar and all sorts of facilities. So they're happy. Okay, that's that problem solved. Mm-hmm. And yet again, now after 30 years, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but that's what happened.
Mm.
I've got very little recollection of where I stayed for that short period. It must have been Laulismar still, but it's funny. Although I've got a good memory, I've got no memory of that. But what I do know is that we were now told that we were going to have the accommodation or a flat in. Okay, you know it is the casino in Paldiski.
Mm-hmm.
It was then called something else, and it was actually named after the colonel who was in charge of the Paldiski area. I forget his name now. Hotel Lux. Is that it? Lux? His name was something like Hotel Lux.
Mm. Lux, maybe. Something.
Lux. Mm-hmm. Hotel Lux, which was a joke.
Mm.
It was actually where the former Soviet naval commander, who was an admiral, lived. And that sounds great.
Mm.
Except it was a smashed building again. No heating, no hot water. And Otto said to me, bless him, he said to me, "Hey Chris, have they got a sauna?" Because he was new to the game, you know. Mm-hmm. I said, "Otto, be lucky if we got water. You'd be really lucky if we got hot water." He didn't compute that. The funny thing was, there was actually a sauna downstairs, but it was smashed to pieces. Mm. But in its day, that would have been a really nice place. Now, the one thing that I'd learned in Latvia was, you've got to force the issue. So we were told that they were going to repair the apartment. And I knew that if we didn't move in, it would take forever. In fact, I think that's why I don't remember staying in Laulismore. I think actually next day, even in the bad situation with this hotel looks, I said to Otto, we're going to move in, because if we don't, they're going to leave us in Laulismore. Because the same thing happened to us in Darji. We moved into the flats which they'd not refurbished to make them do it, and they did do it once we moved in.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved in, and then slowly but surely they started to do something with it. And I got to admit, I laughed. I got a laugh. I came in one afternoon after a day's work, and they came in to do some decorating. And when they painted the ceiling, they didn't cover my equipment. So all my kit is covered with splats of white paint. I just shook my head and thought, oh God, it was funny,
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. And then after 2 weeks, they put in a small electric boiler. And yet again, that reminded me of how pleasant it is to have hot water is there available, well, literally on tap. And yet again, it's something we forget about nowadays, But when you haven't got hot water and you've got to keep on boiling it,
Mm-hmm.
or you haven't got a steady water supply, that is a massive embuggerance. That is a real pain in the arse.
Yeah.
So that was a massive luxury, and I did make a comment to Otto about this. I said, I found out this actually. We were only one of 10 buildings in Paldiski who had access to hot water.
How long you had to stay there before you kind of leave, like the Estonian part now? What was the initial idea?
I think after a week they started to do things with it. Like, they changed the toilet, the plumbing system. They did some redecorating, and the main thing was they put in the boiler.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a destroyed building. The flat wasn't destroyed, but it was. The toilet system was kaput.
Mm-hmm.
The water system was kaput. I don't think there was any heating at that time. But we did get some sort of heating. We did get hot water, and they did some sort of painting, which made it okay. But there was a vermin infestation. So I'd come back after a day's work, and there would be you could see fortunately it wasn't rats, it was mice.
Mm-hmm.
You could see the mouse shit everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that they'd been climbing onto the kitchen table and stuff, and I realised that's a problem then, because that's where you prepare food and stuff. So.
But in total, how long you had to be in Estonia, like for that kind of deployment or whatever? How much time you had in the country now, or was that now a longer decision because you just came from the Latvia, right?
So that was in the first
Mm-hmm.
weeks. Yes, I got to admit I wasn't too bothered. It's just a case of another situation,
Mm-hmm.
And we've solved the heating, we've solved the hot water, and now it's the vermin infestation. So I okay. Jest uvash mushalufka. I think I've pronounced that right. That means, have you got a mousetrap in Russian?
Mm.
Because I went to the local Kalbermeyer, which was still very Soviet, and I had to learn, because they didn't speak Estonian or English, so I had to learn. I asked the lads, how do you ask for a mousetrap? Yes, do vash mushalufka. So, and when I asked for it, the woman behind the counter just burst out laughing. You know, obviously understanding this guy, you know, and that was, and I laughed as well, you know. But Otto, who used to go back to Finland most weekends, he got some Finnish mousetraps because these the ones I was given were worthless. They didn't work. So we then started to have a competition about who could kill the most mice, you know. And we did. I think we did get rid of it. We did get rid of it in the end. Yeah, but you know, and then the local there was a little shop next door, and there was it was just like the old days in England, you know. There was this massive cat on the counter, and I don't know how I expressed it, but because nobody spoke English in those days, but I asked her what, and I said to her, "Why is the cat so big?" And she replied, "Well, the rats are big." And I thought, oh, fair comment. And it made me realise actually why people used to have cats in the old days. And even small dogs, small ratting dogs. It was to keep the place, or to keep the vermin infestation down. There was actually a reason for having these pets. You know, they were working animals. You know, so that reminded me. I thought, okay, fair one. And in fact, in retrospect, you know, I should have got myself a cat. So I suppose this leads me on to how did I feel really being in a former Soviet sub base? Because you don't, that's not something that happens often in your military career, when bearing in mind that the Soviet Union was only sort of yesterday, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start off, I suppose, by something I did mention once. When I walked into the Dapo Magaziner, which is yet again the shop, which I think is still there in Paldiski, next to the casino. Yet again, I said to the guys, give me a sentence in Estonian to ask for something, and they gave it to me. Yet again, that was totally worthless in the shop. So, and yeah, again, this I was used to this. I was used to this now, where nobody understands you. Now, before I came to the Baltic states, no matter where you went in the world, they spoke English. You know, South America, Africa, they spoke English, and you took it for granted. You know.
Mm.
Which is a bit of a mistake. It leaves you in, yeah. So you don't realise how I called it a language prison, and how it can really narrow down the ability to do things when you can't communicate properly. So, I'm in this shop, and I'm on my own, and it's about -10 outside. And I'm in shirt sleeve order because, you know, we tend to dress down. So I was getting looked at like a zoo animal. That's a fair one, you know. These people were, in fact, most of these people were families of Soviet military. In fact, they were. It was families of Soviet military.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in there, and somebody could see I was struggling, and she came up to me, and I later found out she was an English teacher. She was Russian, but she was an English teacher. And she said to me, "We knew you would come. We knew you Americans would come." And I looked at her and I said, "I'm not an American. I'm English." And she grabbed me by the arm and said, "Oh, I'm so glad I like the English. I don't like the Americans." And I don't know if she would have said the opposite if I. And that startled me a bit. And she said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want that." And she said, "Oh, that's Johnny Hleb." So that was the next Russian word I learned. Dajte, pожалуйста, Johnny Hleb. And Airtel, which means that one. So I started to get by a little bit. In fact, later on in life, I started to teach some English because I started to form a relationship with her, a professional relationship, because she was married to a former Soviet submariner, and she said to me, "I'll teach you some Russian if you help me with teaching English in my school in the evenings." And I thought, yeah, okay. And in fact, that did me a lot of good because from a sort of social experiment point of view, I integrated with the locals to a point. Or they because it's a small village atmosphere, people who met me would then talk about to other people. And they said he's a good guy and he's okay and he's helping us with English and he means well and all the rest of the stuff. And I found out many years later that actually the local bad guys, the guy in charge of the local bad guys actually told his bad guys, "Don't touch him," because I was teaching his wife English. And the wife of the police chief in the town, I was teaching his wife. So I found actually, because you see, they asked me if I wanted to be paid for it. I said, no, I won't accept any money. So I was doing it, twice a week in the school for free, So I did make some friends, and I made a lot of goodwill, which I think is important, as part of our world of doing things, So I was, I saw often people packing their bags to leave for Russia, with the vehicles and stuff. So there was some natural wastage, but mainly at that time there was a lot of Russian families from the Soviet times, and they were just stranded because their probably husbands got told to go or leave Estonia and go back to now Russia, and they had nowhere in Russia to put them, so they had to stay in Paldiski. So I felt a little bit, I wouldn't say sorry, but I had empathy for their position. And also, I never, although the R word, whether you like it or not, had a sort of bad connotation then, like it might have now. I didn't have any personal animosity, and I'd not been subjected to subjugation by the Soviet bloc, so I didn't want to get involved in any of this. You could say what I'd learnt in Northern Ireland, this divide. To me, people are people, so I try to ignore this. And the funny thing is, eventually, her husband presented me with his officer's dagger, which they get presented with on completion of their commissioning course, then in the Soviet Army or Navy in his case. And I was quite aghast at being presented with that because I knew it meant a lot to him. But I also understood at this stage that this is obviously some months later that to say no would be an insult. So I had to gratefully accept it. So yeah, I did become friendly with the local population to a degree, and some members of it, and I found that a great learning experience and quite a humbling experience because they were quite poor and they were living in poor conditions, and they didn't show any animosity towards me. So yeah, any other takeaways from that?
And
No,
at the same And at the same time, you were advising now the
Well,
instructors,
yeah,
right?
well, obviously that's the sort of background to my living
Mm-hmm.
conditions. I'm now in Paldiski. So what's happening now in Paldiski? Well, I'm not going to go into it in too great a detail because really I'd be repeating myself
Mm-hmm.
about many of the things that we talked about before. Because the only difference is now I am the supervisor and they are the trainers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing this. They're now doing what I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I said we've talked about this, so I don't feel the need to
Yep.
repeat it. Now I've got to add something on here about this. And actually, I had a bit of a confrontation with one of my bosses back in England about this. Now, these guys who we trained, the minimum rank was sergeant, then it was lieutenant, and then I think it was one captain who was the company commander. Now, because they were sergeants, they're sergeants. Now, in my world, that's a big thing. And now something I didn't understand then, but I learnt later, was that in their world, that's not a lot. I'm not saying that's a right determination. I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
that was how it's viewed by a lot of senior people. And also, a lot of these guys were actually, the sergeants were actually conscript sergeants. So they'd not even finished or completed their entire conscript service. So think about this. We have now trained people who have not even finished the conscript cycle, but they've signed a contract which has made them professional, and we've trained them, and they are now training their own troops.
Mm-hmm. Quite a
Wow.
transition.
Wow. Because you know what? That proves that the conscript cycle in Estonia and the Baltics, I'm not sure if Latvia and Lithuania still do that, but it does prove actually under the right conditions that system of work does work. But there's one proviso. That group has to be trained professionally to start. Otherwise, it's just make believe, for want of a better way to describe that. And you know what? I've only really quite realised that as I'm saying it. So yeah, you know what? Yeah, wow. But I didn't know that at the time. So I've got to say and give even more admiration and congratulations to the Estonian personality and soldier that they learnt so much so quickly and could pass it on well. However, that said, you must have a supervisor with a depth of knowledge and confidence to make sure that any gap is filled, which they haven't been taught yet or don't understand fully, can be also taught on the job. And also that they know that they've got the confidence, because they know if they are not sure how to do their lesson, they can come to me to ask. And I do know that even whilst they were good lads doing well, What gave them the backbone and the confidence to take on this enormous enormous job to do in such a short space of time was that when they had doubts, they could walk into my office. I'll go, yeah, come on, I'll go and show you again. and yeah, absolutely. So you need that supervisor who is there to guide and help, to assist. And you know what? Even if you're not having to do anything, they know you're there. And of course, without that, standards can slip. Human nature being human nature. Because I won't go into it now, but you need that, because also I can be the caring father. I can also be the strict father. So if I see something not going well, I can say, right, stop. That's not going to happen. This is what you're going to do. And they also know that as well. So if they have a moment of weakness and think, oh, I'll go for a beer tonight and I'll just hope my lesson goes well tomorrow. If they know that I'm going to be there, they know they can't get away with it. So supervision is very important, because everybody, including myself, has moments of weaknesses where if you're not being checked on, you might go, let's cuff it. We say cuff it, which means just not prepare it, just hopefully you've got enough information to get away with giving the lesson. And of course, I actually was trained by this method, actually, that if someone walks into the office and says to me, go and teach troop battle drills, I'll walk out the office and do it. I don't like it, but I can do that. But not many people can, And it's also not the best way to do things, because you know what? I might not get away with it, So, and it actually did happen to me often in Paldiski in later life. People just walk in and say, can you do this? I go, yeah, okay. So
and at the same time, right, you don't have any real authority over them, because they also know, like in Afghanistan, that hey, you must leave at some point, and we can if you go through that, you're going to be the tough guy or the tough father type of a person who's going to be strict. It will only last for months, right? Because eventually you have to leave. From their point of view.
Well, okay, I think what you're saying, well, from my perspective, what you said is this. That's you. At all times, you must have supervision. And when you lose supervision, standards will start to drop.
Yep. I get it.
That's what in military terms, that's how I would describe it. Because actually this did happen later on. And of course I'm being supervised because my boss will visit and he will look at them training, and if they're not performing well, he's not going to be picking them up. He's going to be coming to my office and really going for it. What have you've let the site, what's going on? I saw this today, explain yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That said, though, how I like to view things and behave is that, and my call is, if you've been trained correctly with the correct ethos, the strictest supervisor is yourself, where you will self-reflect and also prepare because you don't want to do something badly. Because often we have to work on our own. Because I don't also like the idea that you only work well if you've got somebody on your shoulder. Because if that is the situation, you've not been trained properly. You need to be, because nobody can be constantly supervised, or if they are, that becomes like, you just let me get on and do the bloody job. So there's a balance there.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody's always looking at me, I actually had a not an argument, but my one of my bosses once, he asked me what I thought of him, and I explained to him, if you want to supervise me, don't hide in a bush, because I saw you many times. I said, I don't mind if you want to supervise, but just be honest about it. And that's what I got taught. When you supervise, you introduce yourself and you do it discreetly. So there's many things from that, from a supervisory point of view. So it's getting the balance right. That's all I'd say on that.
Mm-hmm.
But you must have some sort of supervision. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the supervisor must be very capable of understanding what he's looking at. And then when he sees it's wrong, he can explain what's wrong and he can correct it. Otherwise, a supervisor is worthless, which I think we've talked about before. Mm. So far so good then. They did a good job. The system is working. They know they can walk into my office and ask for any assistance. I know it gave a lot of a bit of a feel-good factor to the company commander's office, you know. And I used to pop in, 2 or 3, once a day or something, happily saying, "Okay, guys, how is it going?" And they'd then tell me a few problems, and Otto was good at it as well in this case, and we'd help them, they'd get on with it, and then I would just make sure that the training program was going to plan. Which I got to, actually, this is a good time to mention this actually. Everything in Paldiski at 8 o'clock, there'd be a problem. And I said to Otto, it was all plans fail at 8 o'clock. Because our lack of infrastructure and other things, there'd be a problem. It could be transport not turning up. It could be some sort of equipment that I'd been promised would be there, and it wouldn't be there. Mm. And we'd quickly have to solve it, and we did solve it. All the things that happen often were quite bizarre, and I'd just be shaking my head in disbelief. How can that be so? I've not really got any great examples because they were so bizarre that I think my mind just rinsed it. And then I'll just deal with the next bizarre problem. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy. So there were daily problems from an infrastructure position, which I suppose really is not unusual in that situation. But we made it work, and I have to admit I quite enjoyed that. It was every day was a problem-solving exercise. So I wasn't just sat on my backside in an office. It was making the clock, which kept on stopping, work again, and we succeeded. So all's well that ends well on that. And when we finished the training there, we had a final exercise in Ojaste. And that's when now the three companies are coming together, which form really, well, it's the three rifle companies are the Baltic Battalion. Mm-hmm. So let me just think. This must be now the final exercise on completion of training was February in '96. That actually caused a big influx of uh, more Royal Marines to help us because we had lots of field firing exercises, and we needed more supervisors, and we needed more supervisors for the exercises. It was pretty cold conditions, but yeah, again, just like the previous exercises we'd done, the Estonians and Lithuanians and Latvians were now working, though. They were now working as section commanders and troop commanders and troop sergeants. So the big takeaway from this was the NCOs and officers who trained their platoons are now working as the NCOs and officers within the platoon itself. So we've got a big influx of our guys in now to be the supervisors for the exercise. That went well. Um, I've got to admit there's a slight simile here actually because no, it went well. I won't mention it. It went well, and at the end of it, we had a big parade.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see everything's like the same except it's getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've got a big parade of 3 rifle companies in Latvia. And that was another major event,
Mm-hmm.
and that was an awesome sight to see. And I'm pretty sure that's when we had the Baltic Battalion. You know, I sent you that picture once of the 3 Baltic presidents.
Yeah.
I think that's when it was taken.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when the Baltic Battalion flag was presented, and this was now seen as the real formation of the Baltic Battalion itself. And we had lots of people, lots of diplomats who came that day, and defence attaches. And I think that's when I learnt that. Off the cuff remark from some senior officer, he said we didn't expect this to work, and they were very surprised but very pleased, you know. So that was good. So any questions on anything so far?
No, everything seems to go in the right direction so far.
Yeah. So just to sum that up, then we've actually now being successful. We've certainly done more than I expected us to do when I got asked to do this job in the beginning, and it's how my job got bigger, and we successfully trained many people who had been in the Soviet army to be the trainers. We'd now had the first professional soldiers from the Baltic states, formed the nucleus of the Baltic Battalion by being the 3 infantry companies successfully. We had the final exercise, which had shown that everybody is capable to the same standard, and we finished it with the diplomatic side of it, when collectively we had defence attaches and people from the foreign offices, and I think even our second most senior person from the Royal Marines came out was a Major General. So yeah, it was a big event. So what happened next? Well, we left. And the next stage of the plan, though, was that the Nordics are going to really start to take over. because the Baltic Battalion was formed to go on peacekeeping missions. And one of the comments that was made to me was that the Nordic countries are short of personnel, and by doing this we can also help the Baltics, but we can also help ourselves by we're short of manpower. Now I don't quite believe that. I don't quite believe that. I think somebody might have spinned that line. But this though did start to sow a seed which worked against us at a later stage, and I'm not sure if I should mention it at this stage. But it's the peacekeeping aspect, and I think you know what I mean by this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you notice though, up to this stage, it's been infantry. And what is peacekeeping? Well, at this stage, it's just a mission-specific task. So forget the word peacekeepers, because a peacekeeper actually might have to go into the complete war fighting role on the spin of a sixpence, and that's an old small coin we had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a good peacekeeper is a thoroughly trained infantryman. A poorly trained peacekeeper, I believe, can actually go into war fighting mode when he panics and behave that way when he shouldn't. So our team left and more Nordics arrived. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say we left, I haven't really left, because previous to this, the defence attaché came to see me and said, would you be prepared to be loaned to the Estonian army?
So that was kind of a thing, like, or how do you even come up to that kind of thing, that hey, can we loan someone from other person's other army? Was that like a common thing?
No. No. No, very uncommon. I think it's a good time to mention this. I don't want to talk about changing uniforms at this stage, but bearing in mind, when I was loaned, I'm not changing uniforms. I'm a fully paid up member, you know. Mm-hmm. But when you're loaned, you're given to the country, and now you're part of them. But you're still being paid for by the Brits. And in fact, what can happen is, although it didn't happen in this case, the country that you're loaned to pays Great Britain. For example, we used to have guys on loan service to the Saudis, and they would pay a very big amount of money.
Yeah. Very
big amount of money. Because not only are you paying for the wages, you're paying for how much it took to train that man. They had some sort of calculation, so we're talking severe money, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, in this situation, it was you just got to feed the guy and house him. That didn't work out too well, but that's another story. But I think I've got to mention it because myself, you know, I have a hard time saying we left because I didn't really leave. Although I did go on leave, I was actually going for a run in Paldiski, and the defence attaché, who I've now got a good relationship with, he was walking in the door as I was walking out. And I'm like, well, because he didn't actually come to see, he never came to visit me unless he wanted something, which was not often. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, well, all right, hello, hello. And he was quite. I like the guy, but he was a little bit eccentric. And he went, Colours. He said, would you be loaned to the Estonian Army? Now, fortunately, not being married and having this attitude, I can just go, yeah, okay. I didn't have a clue about what I was going to do, where I was going to go, about the conditions. But I have to admit, at this stage, although I've sort of talked about these conditions in Paldiski and all the rest of it, but I am really enjoying it because it's also allowing me to do a lot more than I could normally do within my own world because I've got a lot more responsibility. And I'm really enjoying doing so much. So I thought, why not? Okay. So I said yes. I said only proviso is I want to have my leave. I realised I needed some time off, which I was due. So I said, look, at the end of this deployment, which was, as I've said, at the end of this exercise, can I go back for some leave? He said, yeah, of course you can. So, and I later found out that this wasn't like two defence attaches talking to each other, or maybe the Baltic commander talking to someone. Although obviously it had gone up through this sort of chain of command where it actually went to the Ministry of Defence of each country. So the Ministry of Defence of Estonia, or in fact I believe actually the Minister of Defence talked to the Minister of Defence in UK to personally ask for me. And I found out about this sometime later in England when somebody said they didn't like me going back there because they wanted to send someone else. Because this person, the trouble we had in this situation, in this unique situation, the former Soviet Union, was that the people in UK, although they're very experienced, they didn't understand what we were doing. They didn't understand the conditions. So the way this guy was thinking was like, this guy's been to the Bahamas 2 times. Why is he going to the Bahamas for the 3rd time? Somebody else should have this nice, pleasant tour, He just didn't get it, because he said to me, I tried to stop you going, and I was told to just mind your own business. He's going. They want him, nobody else. He's going. It's been decided at this level. And he was told to shut up in quite severe terms. He tried to make a big thing about it, He was told, no, this is not, he's going, shut up. So that's how I found out there was at very senior levels, because guess what? This is not normal. And of course, no, it's not happened before or since. But that's again a story for another day. But that's why I got a hard time saying that we were leaving, because I didn't leave. Really, I went back on leave. So the 3 companies. Now I can't remember where Lithuania and Latvia went. But I do know that our guys are going to go to Lebanon. And in fact, actually I was in demand at that time, because the Norwegians tried to get me to go as a liaison with the Estonian company to the Lebanon. But the people in charge said that the Brits aren't allowed in that area. There's no MOU for Brits to be there, so they said we can't take it for this sort of political reason. And as it happened, I was at the same time being asked to go to join the Estonian army for some time. So anyway, okay, I'm back in England. The raw, we didn't leave anybody behind. The Nordics are now completely on their own. I'm on leave. I'm trying to make a clear definition now in my mind of where I am. Our guys went to Norway, and they did their mission specific training. I found out later that the Norwegians were not really happy with this, because they thought they were just going to get a bunch of Eastern European, you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
They were going to be more trouble than they're worth.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, the company outperformed the Norwegians. And I remember one of my instructors telling me that when they gave their first weapon training lesson, a lot of Norwegian senior staff came to watch it, and I'm quite sure they were expecting to be something quite, not very good, And at the end of it, they all applauded, and it, they realised, hey, hold on, we've got a really good bunch of guys here. So yeah, that's a success. So what happened next? And I've got to suppose I could really, and I've just referred to some notes there because
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I don't get out of sequence, because this can get quite complicated here. Now the Nordics are taking command. I think that's the most important point. So far so good. Great. The Nordics have received each company, and they're very pleased with what they've got.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually go on missions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I met the guys later, they enjoyed the missions, and from both sides, everybody's very happy. Now, during this time, I've came back and gone to the battle school. I'm now on loan service.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to talk about the battle school though. But because I was in the country, I started to pick up on some things. And I think I can really now sort of sum up about how successful we've been. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were going to go back in May of that year, and that's 95. It's now 96. The guys have gone on missions. The Nordics have expanded, and that makes sense because they've now taken the battalion to go on missions in different parts of the world. Also concurrently, they are forming the battalion staff. Great system of work. So people on missions, and now they can focus on training the battalion staff. So when they come back, they've now trained the battalion staff, and they can now do what they were doing, except now the Nordics can now supervise them.
Mm-hmm.
And still at the same time do what I was doing within my infantry world of adding bits and pieces where necessary, and also making sure they're doing a good job. Somewhere, somebody realised that when they come back from missions, not only may the company that the Estonians have trained may leave, but some of the instructors that we trained initially may also leave. I know I later found out that we did lose some really good guys after the mission because for a number of factors. One, they can speak English, and that was a big thing in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, they'd been trained by Royal Marines. Thirdly, they'd been on very successful missions. So when they came back, they actually had a CV that could pay them a lot more within the civilian military world.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost some really good guys when they came back. Now, somewhere during that time period of coming back, this information must have filtered back somewhere and somehow. Because when I'm at the battle school, I heard that the Royal Marines had came back. Now, when I was in Paldiski, I'm just going to use the Estonian aspect because it's the same thing times 3.
Mm-hmm.
We've now got an Estonian. We've now got a British Royal Marine Lieutenant Colonel back again in Ojaste. We've now got a training team, which I think is probably the same size as what my initial training team was. What's the two main differences? The Royal Marine Lieutenant Colonel, I'm pretty sure I'm right when I say this, was not in charge as the most senior officer, and I mentioned this before. Well, in fact, I may not have mentioned it, but I would term this now as the Nord Baltic Battalion. The Nord Baltic Battalion is the training original command element which trained now the Baltic Battalion command.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And the Nord also means the British. So the most senior or the person in charge, regardless of rank, is a Nordic. The Royal Marine Lieutenant Colonel who came back, he's in charge of the infantry team, for want of a better word to describe it. And I'm quite sure he was doing quite a lot within the bigger aspect of it, But it wasn't. I wasn't with them. I did visit Paldiski, and I met them there. And they had a training. They had 3 guys. Now, they were not training their training team, the Estonian training team, to train the new infantry platoon. And they were not training trainers to train this in the future. What they were doing was what I trained my Estonians to do, which was to train the infantry platoon in the initial phase of training, which was to train the platoon or to train the soldiers we got from the Estonian society as professional soldiers to be riflemen, to fit in and act as a member of a rifle section when the Estonian company came back and the people who left, we could make up losses.
Mm-hmm.
With me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So they were not training the trainer, they were just training soldiers.
So they had scaled down.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say they scaled down, but their task wasn't so deep.
Mm-hmm.
A bit easy, to be quite honest.
Mm.
I also don't think they were quite invested in the project the way we initially were. Because we'd made something which was now more familiar to what they'd come from. When we came out here, we had to make this. Mm-hmm. So it made us really invested in what we did. Let's mention that because it might be relevant later. What is relevant, but will become more relevant later, is the Nordic Command are now doing all the HQ work. And they never were particularly invested in the infantry work. And I totally get that. I totally get that. However, what must be the prime concern for the Baltic Battalion? It must be the health, and by the health I mean the training of the infantry elements within this battalion. And I may just mention that because we've now got a new system of work, except you can see the change. The Nordics are now the main command element, and the Royal Marine team really have been lessened in their role. They are just as a stopgap to train soldiers to fit into the platoons to make up the numbers when they come back from missions, because somebody had identified we are going to lose people. Otherwise you end up with people training at headquarters and the infantry come back and they've all left the army.
So you couldn't train people because otherwise they would leave. That's the logic?
You say that again?
So the logic is that you can't really train the trainers because they will leave the army?
No.
Because why would they do it? It doesn't make
no,
any
what
sense.
I'm saying is that what I said was, I hope I understood the question right, was one of the downsides, which of course we didn't anticipate, was that by giving these guys the trainers, this is the initial element, so many good new skills, was that they became very attractive and they understood that they were sought after within the civilian world.
Yeah, and that's what my question was. Like now the command thinks that if you give too good of an education to the people, then they are more likely to leave from the military. So let's not give it to them.
No, that didn't happen. No, that wasn't our thought process. The reason why we didn't train them to become the trainers because we didn't have enough, because we didn't need to. Because I now understand your question. Yeah, no, I didn't enter our minds. We just identified the problem. We're losing people now. Within my system, if we train you, for example, real time, we train you to be a pilot. Well, guess what? When you sign on for that training, they will demand, part of the contract will be you cannot now leave the service for 3, 6, 10 years.
Yeah.
Because they want return on investment. So you could argue that one of the mistakes we made or didn't envisage would happen is that with the training we had done, the contracts were not correct. Because the contracts were one where if people were not satisfied or knew they could earn higher money now somewhere else with what they've been trained, they could just leave. Because that can happen in our service.
Yeah.
Except we stop it by saying, no, we'll give you this, but you must give us this back. So I would say actually it was a contractual fault. However, that said, perhaps in those days, we're just paying the price of the situation we lived in, was that you would not be able to get people to sign up for 3 years or 6 years. People may not be prepared to do that. Because this was the first time, and a lot of people, they regarded military life as just this really bad conscript cycle, and so it'd be rape. So that's how I would justify that. Now, the new team that came back just trained the soldier to fit into the platoon.
Yep.
Because although we were losing some, we were not losing all. Because the new system of work would be, when the Estonians did come back, we would make a training team from the Estonian company. So we've now got our company, but we've taken a small group of selected NCOs from it and officers, and they would now be the training team. So now you can see the evolution where we've now got a training team that have now, we've trained initially. They've now got mission experience, they've got further training, and also by leading their men in the field, they come back and they now will form the training team now, actually like I did.
Yep.
And they will now train the soldiers to join the company. With me so far?
Yep. Makes sense.
And that actually did happen. So when they came back, it now downsized again to one Royal Marine was left behind in situ in one of the 3 Baltic states to supervise the Estonians training their company. So you can now, so they've gone back really to the beginning of their time in Paldiski. But of course, you do need fresh blood, and you do need new instructors, because just because you've been in the company doesn't mean to say you're an instructor. So we would now run instructor courses to train selected people from the company to join the instructor training team. So now you see the way the command structure works now is you've got an Estonian training team that has replaced the Royal Marine training team. We trained them to become instructors, and they trained their men to be soldiers. The one thing they haven't been trained to do is to train instructors. So the next evolution was to train the people who teach, is to teach them to train teachers. So the Royal Marines now wrote the course for an instructor's course, and they taught and guided the Estonian trainers to be the instructors for an instructor's course. So it's now becoming more fulfilling, where they're doing it all themselves, and it requires, their task is getting bigger. So I think I can end on this in the phase of the success. We have been very successful on the Baltic Battalion. We have formed the battalion, a full-size battalion itself. We've had guys who have trained their own platoons. They've worked with a foreign country and done very well. They've been in a real-time mission environment and led their own troops. And when they came back to their own Baltic countries, they reformed as a fully working rifle company, but also developed into their own training team to feed soldiers into the rifle company. And they evolved as not only trainers of soldiers, but they've now evolved into selected members, evolved into specialists who can now train their own instructors, who then will fill in slots, because guess what? The training team, they lose people or they get older.
Mm-hmm.
Or the training team wants to go on a mission and rejoin the company, which is also very healthy. So they can get continual experience. And also, it is unhealthy that an instructor only stays in an instructor's position. And we can have a whole new conversation about that, which I won't go into detail. I won't go into that. But I will just say this. I've mentioned before, I was a dedicated instructor. That was my specialist qualification. But the irony is, I would always do my best to get out of a training job and get back to a commando unit to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a good mindset.
Yep, I would agree.
You know, and then you can have a break from that and go back and train and pass on your knowledge and experience.
And I think it also puts you in a position where you have to think through how to teach. And if you have to start thinking how to teach, you start rethinking also what you did on a field in reality.
I think actually, by this circle of teaching and doing makes sure that you don't get unrealistic standards. Actually, you can get unrealistic standards if you don't do. And by doing, this is a bit important. I wrote about this in my articles. If you teach it, you must do it. If you haven't done it, how can you teach it?
Yeah.
If you've done it and teach it, you might degrade in having to do it because you've not done it for a long time yourself. And that's when you get false expectations where, and I have seen this with people in their job too much, they would actually be too strict and too much of a high standard because they'd forgotten actually to empathise with, it's not quite as simple as you think. You've forgotten what it's like. So it's very important that the instructor also experiences the doing part of his job. Not only do I teach it, I'll do it. And also it gives you the confidence and knowledge that when you teach, the things you can't learn everything on a course. You learn by doing. And that's when, by being very inexperienced, you can teach things that aren't in a book. And you can, all the extra add-ons. And that's why we got taught, or we were told on our course, yes, you've got a book as a guidance, but you've also got your own experience, which you can add on into it to make it personal. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, I always use the sentry on the fight patrol who didn't indicate to his section commander what he saw. And if he'd done just that one simple thing, our platoon could have been destroyed. And that's why when I taught that lesson, duties of a sentry, I was a real hard ass about that, about why you must do these things. So, yeah, again, this is a cycle of how things work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in Estonian there is a saying that, or at least it was told to my wife, that when we got a kid, that there was some abnormalities in terms of how she grew, in terms of how she developed, and then the doctor said that yes, children don't grow by the book; they just grow differently. Yeah. Yes, there is some baseline understanding of how things are, but eventually you have to you grow through experience and practice, and what you see in the real world.
Because you can be a great instructor by the book. Mm-hmm. But you lack experience. And then it's only the book. There's this balance.
Yeah.
But I would say though, You absolutely must have the book. You must have the baseline. As I said before, it's like what I call the skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
You must have that skeleton, and the experience is the meat and the flesh that you put on it. And like any skeleton that's had meat and flesh, you now must move to keep a good body form. And if I use this analogy, by going back and doing the job, you're keeping the good body form.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so if we examine when training doesn't go correctly, if I was to write down those things as a simple list,
Mm-hmm.
you can easily work out why things aren't working. I haven't done those things. You don't do that. And of course, the first one is if your initial training isn't very good, everything else will fail because it is a house built on sand.
Mm.
But
If you don't realize that it is built on sand and you don't redo it.
you don't. Well, what you do is you teach people to build a house on sand.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do. And you think it's a good house.
Mm.
Because nobody lives in the house and uses the house, it actually manages to stay up. But if you go in the house, it falls down after a little bit of movement. And if I use that same analogy, in peacetime, you can do this training based on poor training, and what you do can appear to be fine with blank ammunition, but when it's actually against a real enemy, you're going to fall down. And you suddenly realise, uh-oh, I've got a problem.
Mm.
Too late then. Does that analogy make sense?
Absolutely. It does.
So I'll leave it on there with how the Baltic Battalion worked and evolved, where now we finished up with an Estonian training team training their own soldiers who are joining the Alpha Company, who's a great rifle company, which can join foreigners to go on missions who are highly regarded. Not only are Estonian NCOs and officers training their own men, they're training their own instructors. They need minimal guidance and supervision from one person
Mm-hmm.
in country. Wow.
And that's only in what? How many years?
And well, we did that in 2 years.
Yeah, it's a very short time.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned earlier that when I went back to UK and mentioned some of the things I'd done with Estonians, I was laughed at and said, you can't do that. And I just said, well, I did. And left it at that. Yeah, but I did. So I learned a lot about myself and about many other things that I'm not even sure how to describe.
Mm-hmm.
It was a massive, it was a fantastic experience. Fantastic experience. I loved it. And you could argue, why could you love that? Living in such sometimes squalid conditions, being away from families. I mean, there was no TV, no nothing. You know, it's very little then, but I loved it. I think it's because I felt I was making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this brave new world.
Mm.
It was this element of brave new world.
It's a romantic thing.
It was. I loved it, and that's why when I was asked to change uniforms, I as I said before, I knew it because I'd been loaned to the army.
Mm-hmm.
I did fully understand this was not going to be a pleasant experience, but I also knew that if I was successful, it means I've not wasted my life.
Mm-hmm.
I must do it. But that's a story for another day.
Mm-hmm.
So far so good. Fantastic. We've really built something. So Remo, any questions about anything else said about the and I would say actually, can you now have a vision of what we did? And not only you, but anybody listening, can you understand what we did?
Absolutely. I think you had established a pretty solid foundation, which should be able to, with very little resources, multiply itself and become something pretty big and solid. And that's something which is established in the Baltics pretty much, and especially in Estonia. And now I think that so what's going to start happening is that we're going to start getting closer to 2000s, and then the Iraq war starts, right? And at the moment, then there's multiple years where they are kind of continuing this procedure or process.
Well, I've got to be. Now we see. You have to be careful here. Because I don't want to talk about what I did in Estonian uniform yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to talk about Iraq
Mm-hmm.
or Afghanistan just yet. I think what's really relevant now, because you see, if I express myself this way, and you read my articles that I wrote for the Soldier magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny how life is a sort of domino effect, because I would never ever dreamed of having a podcast with you or anybody. Never. Although it'd have been hard for me to say no. When you first approached me, and I said, "Sorry, Remo, but I don't publicise myself or put myself out there. I just don't do that."
Mm-hmm.
But when I was approached by the Soldier magazine editor, who came to see me personally, he was going. He asked me to give him well, he was writing an article about how successful the Estonian platoon was in Iraq with the Americans. And they were. They were really well thought of. They were great. But you see, really a snowball effect of how the Estonian platoon was in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only that way because of me. I hate saying that. And that's another subject for another day.
Mm-hmm.
Will eventually make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted to write an article which really was, the Estonian Defence Forces training system is so great because we did so well in Iraq. And we learnt lessons which were passed on into the Estonian Defence Forces. That was the, you could say, the thrust, the aim of his piece for the magazine. And can you just give me two lines of letters? In fact, he said to me, "Can you give me 2 lines of what lessons the Estonian Army learnt and how it improved training within the EDF?" And I said to him, "Well, I don't talk to journalists. But I will answer your question by saying this. The Estonian Army learnt nothing from Iraq. Well, they didn't learn anything systematically. They may have learnt something unsystematically, only because of the goodwill of the individual soldier who came back and could pass on knowledge. But it was not helped or assisted, and it wasn't in the system, because when he dies, that dies.
So there's nothing to pass on.
No, there's no system to pass it on. And you can see I've just explained a module that builds itself and is able to what's the good word? Able to repopulate itself, to regenerate itself. And it's not about an individual, it's about a training system, because you know what? You can die, you can leave. We've got a system to replace you, because nobody is irreplaceable. But in an unsystematical situation, that person, yes, he can become irreplaceable, because when you go, we haven't got a system to pass that knowledge on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's terrible. So of course, you can understand, I felt quite strongly about the inference that I actually help him to spread to reinforce the claim to certain command elements that they did a good job when in fact they did a terrible job. And in fact, that I spread the lie that the Baltic Battalion was successful in the long run, and they supported it to improve training to ensure that the Estonian army could perform on missions just the way they did in the early days. That's not true. And also, it reinforces bad practice, because, oh yes, we're so good, he's told us we're good, and you continue and refuse to learn, and you ignore advice. So I probably said too much there, but oh yeah, I was quite angry about that. So I said to him, well, it didn't, and I can't explain that unless I explain about the Baltic Battalion. You see now that how what I'm saying now will blend into what you read in in those articles.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I continue now and explain how the Baltic Battalion went wrong, it explains why so much could have happened if it had been supported correctly by everybody. That's not just the Estonians I'm talking about the British, the Nordics, about MODs. Everything that myself and other small groups of Estonians were trying to do for the Iraq platoon was something that I know could have been working for the entire EDF.
Mm-hmm.
And they threw it away. And for that,
let's walk that part through. How did that happen?
So exactly. So I've got to try and find a way to get to the point to explain in a hopefully understandable sequence about how we lost the ability to train the entire army along the same standards of the Baltic Battalion, which are the same standards as the Iraqi infantry platoon. Now I told you I made some notes and was going to follow a certain sequence. So I think now I'll just freestyle it a bit, you know.
So I took a leak as well, so we can
sure,
continue now.
Sure. The wife's working actually on the internet with.
Yeah, it's okay.
You know, but it's just a little bit. It was getting a bit loud, so I will try and keep up to to some of my notes I made, because this is
Mhm.
a little bit. I want to make sure I don't get it wrong because it's so important.
Mhm. All right, let's go.
So, yeah, it's been a great success. Um, and if it worked out correctly, the entire Baltic countries could have. So I've got a reference point here. Everybody knows in Estonia, or certainly in the army, how successful the Iraq platoon was. The entire army could have been like that. Alpha Company initially was a fantastic company. The entire army could have been like that and trained to the same standard, and then even more, because when you've got a system, you can improve and improve and improve.
Mhm.
When you haven't got a system, you can have something good that degrades and degrades and degrades. Works both ways. So the Baltic Battalion project started to degrade. What were the mistakes made? And this is my own personal opinion, based on living it
Mhm.
and being slightly intuitive. When I changed uniforms, because the Baltic Battalion had been so successful, I thought when I met now people outside that orbit, they'd be like so enthusiastic about grabbing this product. It was the opposite. It was the absolute opposite.
Hmm.
Baltic Battalion was referred to with horror. The reason it was referred to with horror was it was taking up a large part of the defence budget, and the other main point of contention which disturbed people was that they were seen as peacekeepers. And I was often told this, but they're just peacekeepers, they can't fight.
Mhm.
And this blew me away. So unfortunately, but understandably, it's just their ignorance. But and they would have understood that whilst it may have been expensive to them, in the long term, it would have been a great investment. But so I'm not going to say they were wrong in thinking that. I'm not going to say they were wrong. It's just what happened, and it was unfortunate. Our mistake was, and I can also say, but we really didn't know it at the time. So I'm talking retrospectively.
Mhm.
But our biggest mistake was that you'd have to say to yourself, if we are going to commit ourselves to this project, and certainly at the time, on my initial commitment, it cost a lot of money, it cost a lot of equipment, it cost a lot of time, and I know my corps personally gave away 10% of its top instructors. You have to think in the long term, what is our aim? And the aim surely must be that we train the Baltic Battalion, that not only are they able to go on missions with other countries, but the training that we conduct will infiltrate and be taught to their own armies. Now, I actually said to my boss, we're actually training them to fight and defend their country. I did use another word, but I'm not going to say it on this broadcast. And he said, "Oh no, don't say that." You know. Sometime later, he said to me, "Well, yeah, of course we are." Well, yeah, of course we are. Yeah, I know that. So it's understandable that whilst it was useful that we train guys who could be used in the Nordic countries, I believe the main motive was that we are indirectly helping them to join NATO. So I would say to the detractors of Baltic, you are very foolish and very ignorant because you threw away and destroyed NATO. And when you joined NATO, you could have been NATO compatible with its infantry, and you were not. You destroyed all that good work. But as I said, from their perspective, understandable, so it's not personal. And I believe the mistake was that through osmosis, that our training would just somehow filter into the system. While also coupled with the peacekeeping and money, there was an iron curtain came down from the EDF side because of this. So what should have happened? I believe the MOU and the task should have been to build the Baltic Brigade. Now, one of the things I was going to say, which I learnt, but I didn't really learn because I knew this. When people go to war and they know they might die, suddenly people who aren't very serious about some things get very serious because they know that if they get it wrong, they're going to die, or their men are going to die. And that's why when I went onto the Iraq, although I can use it as a way to describe this, when I started to train the Iraq troop, I did get support because they understood that without it, there's going to be a lot of body bags coming back to Estonia, and that's not going to go down very well. But I'll talk about that in detail later. Now, everybody that we trained on the Baltic Battalion was still only quite junior when it came to the decision-making process. We're talking, Lieutenant Major, Lieutenant Colonel Max. Mm-hmm. It's mainly lieutenants and captains. Whilst they may understand its importance, everybody else doesn't. If we'd had a Baltic Brigade, that would have meant that senior officers would have had to have been within the Baltic Brigade staff. And that means you're going to start getting now at least minimum 1-star general officers in the Baltic Battalion. You're going to have lieutenant colonels, you're going to have colonels. And now you're not going to have a company going on a mission, you're going to have a battalion. Now, whilst that battalion may be made up of 3 different companies from the Baltics, you'll have a leadership at senior level. That will be senior officers on the ground with a large formation and a proper headquarters. That it's got a headquarters that is dealing with real war fighting, and they can clearly see that this is not Kivad Torm. This is real. If you can't make the right decisions, or even if you're making the best decisions, if your infantry companies are not trained at every level, that is the rifleman, that is the section commander, that is the troop sergeant, that is the platoon commander, that is the company 2IC, that is the company commander himself. If they have not been trained to a high standard, they will fail in their mission, and you will see it clearly. And not only will you see it clearly, and this is important that I've noticed with the, not even within the Estonian culture, it's called peer group pressure. When your battalion fucks up, the other countries look at you. If it's a platoon, it's just a lieutenant, no one cares. When you're a full colonel or a brigadier and you're looked at like that, oh, that hurts. And if that did hurt because you had allowed that system to develop, when you got your backside back to your own country, in Estonia in this case, you'd have said, we got to stop this, we got to get ourselves sorted out because we can't allow us to go on. This has not been correct. He couldn't do this, he couldn't do this, he couldn't do that. Because the problem with only the platoon and company being trained, when they came out for missions or trained for missions, and when they were lacking in support, equipment or training, they had no support from above. Because they didn't want to know, because they didn't understand, and they just thought from below it is just bitching, get on and do it. And that is why when I was with the Afghanistan company, every company commander would say to me, why does it feel excuse me, from last week, what does it feel that every time we start this training it is if we have never done this company training before? And that's the exact words these guys would say to me. You haven't got this system. Whereas when I put this system within the Iraq platoon, at the end of it, it was like my old days, you know. We had soldiers, they came in, we had a training program, we had trained instructors, we knew what we were doing, and it just happened each day to a standard. And it became, I hate saying this, it became, well, I'm not going to say it, actually it's a word that I told my guys never say it. Because as soon as you say it, it goes wrong. So I will explain it this way. It no longer becomes a nightmare it was at the beginning. It becomes quite a normal everyday process. So we made a mistake because the MOU wasn't big enough to cover the Baltic Battalion, and also part of the MOU should have been that what we teach within the Baltic Battalion will be used to teach the Estonian Army. Because why are we teaching it two different ways? If you say you want to do it your way, well, you know what? Guess what? We are not going to train the Baltic Battalion. You just train your own men. But you pay the price. In fact, we're not going to take you on missions because we know you're not up to standard. So you're not even in the game. And this is not the Estonians' fault. I don't think it's anybody's fault really, because in those early days it was just getting the foot in the door. But I still think that people well above me should have foreseen this. And once we got, now when you put your foot in the door, what do? You open the bloody door. And they didn't open the door. They didn't open the door. They let it gradually be closed again. Does that make sense?
I think so. What I'm hearing here, what I've got some notes, is that I would even think even bigger than that, because eventually, like, how do you get the experience for the higher senior level people in each Baltic country? Is, for example, if you think Iraq or Afghanistan, if we had put together a I don't know, whatever battalion or whatever, a bigger unit from 3 companies from each country, for example, and sent that to Afghanistan or to Iraq or wherever, then actually you would get also senior level experience from the real world. But as we didn't have, it kind of sounds to me that what we kind of established in that area is that we were able to train the frontline troops on a very small scale, and that's something where it kind of got stuck in, and it didn't evolve and grow into the actual leadership, and it had much bigger potential, and both parties didn't realize that we should negotiate our actual MOU to become bigger than it is at the moment.
Yeah, I could, because you see, this is why, and I mentioned this at the beginning about the MOD.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the MOD should have got involved. Now, I'm going to say it. Now, General Kurt became the Chod. And he had a vision, because he'd seen the Baltic Battalion. He asked me to join the army because he wanted it. He wanted what he saw in the Baltic Battalion to go into the main army.
Mm-hmm.
It's why he got me loaned, because obviously it's from his level. He asked above and above to get me to be loaned to the battle school, because that's exactly what he was doing. And if he'd not been replaced, he would have given me the power with him and others to get that into the system for everybody. But when he was Game of Thrones, which I think does describe the situation, and you had the old Soviet crap put in place, for want of a better description, who might be fine people and patriotic and all the rest of it, but their knowledge base is from the old Soviet Union crap, and they are HQ centric with their heads stuck up their arses, who think infantry training is basically as a rifle, fuck off and die. If you may notice, I'm getting angry now about this. These stupid, ignorant bastards start to be put in charge in very senior positions, who had no understanding or care of understanding of what real infantry is, because their knowledge is based on the Soviet crap, which they are still paying the price for, the real Russians in Ukraine now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were totally unwilling, not only because of the factors I mentioned before, but because of their backgrounds.
Now I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So do you think that we just lost time with making those mistakes, or not being able to see them as the situation required, or are we still suffering from not having learned the lessons today?
Okay, what's the good news? The good news is that the Chod was in Alpha Company. The Chod was in the Scout Battalion. The Chod has been to Iraq. The Chod has been to Afghanistan. He has had a good level of infantry training and understands its importance. So now you see, if we forget the time factor,
Mm-hmm.
it has actually happened. Where the training that we put in, no matter how it got there, whether it's by Baltic Bat or myself, the hierarchy now get it. The problem is, say, forget the time factor,
Mm-hmm.
is now how do we reinvigorate and get in place what was that project to get the military training for the entire army along the same systematic approach. That makes sense?
And do you see that it's happening or it's not?
All I would say is this. I believe this is the first most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there is a will and an acknowledgement. I think I'll put it first. There's the acknowledgement and a will to correct what was lost. The problem is now, how would you do it? Now, fortunately, there are still lots of the guys who understand in service and now at quite high levels. Also, there are lots of people in place who have still been trained, whether they understand it or not, unsystematically with some sort of bulk bat standard. And I call that actually British infantry training.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of pieces of this jigsaw puzzle out there, because a lot of it has not been lost, because we are still alive and they are still in the army. And that's why I describe it as putting the jigsaw pieces back together, seeing what pieces are missing, and then filling those spaces with the new knowledge. And I believe now there is a way of doing this. I'm not going to go into any detail of what I think about how you should do it, except saying this. You've got a British battalion here. You've got a Ranger regiment here who are the trainers who come out to assist. You have to find a way that they can also help you to solve this problem. That's my personal opinion on this. Which should be quite easy because you're all part of NATO now. Now the trouble is, the British Army doesn't understand what Baltic did. The Rangers don't understand what Baltic did. So you know what? When this comes out on Spotify, I'm going to make sure that the Ranger Battalion get this message. Because another mistake that was made, in no chronological sequence, was that everything we did from a British perspective, even the defence attaches, don't know what we did. So when that defence attache left, who I talked about, who asked me to stay, when he left, you had new defence attaches who didn't even understand, and the Baltic Battalion was actually working, and they didn't even know it was there doing that. They didn't understand the Royal Marines had done what they did. So when they were offering British military assistance, and I'm now in Estonian uniform because I'm learning about this, they were asking guys to come out, and I shit you not, I met a guy from the British Parachute Regiment, a captain in the Parachute Regiment, and he said to me, when I came out and they asked me what to do, the defence attaché said to me, oh, just go and teach them how to play rugby because it's a team building experience. Now, of course, this captain, I got on really well with, he said to me, and I said to him, because he came to me, because he learnt about me, he came to me and asked me for advice, and I said to him, well, first of all, you're not going to play, you're not teach, you will not teach them how to play rugby. He said to me, thank God for that. And I actually found him and his team a job to do for a short time. And it was so there was an ignorance also from the British establishment. So the Royal Marines made a mistake by not making sure that it was continued, or that the defence attaches understood what we were doing.
So if I provide you a read back on the last bit, is that the kind of Brits didn't understand what's the capability you had and what it had kind of possibility to make happen, right? So,
No.
like, what you achieved with such a small group of people, this kind of capability wasn't recognized really.
No, they never didn't understand what they didn't know what we did. And in fact, even when I met the British ambassador in uniform, because the Royal Navy came in for the first time since World War Two, since before World War Two. Of course, because I'm a Royal Marine, I went to see them. They actually came to see me. And then I went to the ambassador's residence for some sort of meeting, and the ambassador said to me, "Oh, are you on board the ship?" I said to her, "No, I've been in Paldiski for a year." I was amazed, and the newer defence attaché didn't know I was there. He didn't understand what we'd been doing there. Now at this time, actually, we were working very healthily, you know. So there was no. It was start, stop, and start again, and nobody knew where we'd been before, so you could start at the wrong place. It was, I actually, in the early days when I changed uniforms, I tried to explain this, and what I found was that they were not interested, and two, didn't understand where I was coming from. They just couldn't believe it. They just couldn't believe it. Yeah, it's pretty sad that. Because I know both sides, I do know that there's the knowledge and the manpower still available to correct this and to fill in all the gaps that have been lost over the years.
So what I'm hearing in terms of that is that, like, usually this is kind of like the special operations are doing this kind of thing, but as I'm saying, that it could be the same thing could be accomplished on a scale if used the resources actually available, which is a lot of instructors, a lot of people who actually know the standard.
Well, if you were to use the model that I described, you just do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's quite simple. It's not rocket science. So what am I going to do first? The first thing I'm going to do is, where's the training program? You don't know quite what should be in the training program. And I'm talking out about, not about me, but I'm talking about, the we, what is done. Right. I will help you write the training program. Oh, can we do that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we didn't know that. And you can add things. So by mutual conversation, you can come to a solution. But the first thing you must do is, I would argue, is we signed up. You mentioned about the bolt back. Well, that's it, British Infantry Standard. So you've got to acknowledge straight away we're going to use the British Infantry Standard model. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's just sign up to it, MOU it. That's it, and that way we can actually share manuals legally.
So do you say that it's not shared at the moment?
Sorry.
So are you saying that it's not shared at the moment? I guess we kind of have the information.
All I'm going to say is this: they've got to be shared legally and systematically, and I don't know if they're being shared or not. Now, what I do know is that in my own day, I had many pamphlets and my own writings translated into Estonian. So guess what? A lot of the information is already out there in those jigsaw pieces. A lot of people are trying to do what would be in that program, except now you can identify it more correctly and make sure now it's being taught to the same standard. So when you've got the training program which you now agree on, you can now say, right, can you teach that? Yes, I can. Good. Show me. Oh, you can't, can you? I'm going to teach you. Or, really good, that is better than me. Great. But you've now got something you can identify, touch, and correct. Now, once you've got the training program and you now agree upon it, you can now say, how do I now progress with this? Well, I want to teach my conscripts this. Well, yeah, because it is the conscript training program. Okay, Who teaches the conscript training program? These people. Can they teach this program? Yes. We'll have to test them. We test them. Can they do it? And depending on what they can do, will be a reteach or a teach, which means an instructor's course. So we teach them on an instructor's course how to train the lessons on the conscript cycle. And just like the Baltic, eventually you're going to train people to train their own instructors to teach this cycle. Because we have the Ranger Battalion here, because we have the British Army here, you can do many things. The big thing now we can do, which I couldn't do, is, guess what? Estonian training scene, you can go to the British Battalion and train them for the week. Or train with them for the week. That's called cross-training. You learn from each other. You work to the same standards or improve your standards together. Mm-hmm. You may identify weaknesses and one side can help the other. You can then go back to your battalions and teach things the same way, because guess what? If you're going to fight with the British, it is best that you can fight the same way as the British and vice versa. So if the Estonians have got some peculiar things they do which are good for Estonia to fight in, guess what? The British have to learn them. Cross-training. We send people to Britain to teach, to actually do an instructor's course and to teach on an instructor's course with the British. See, it's called cross-fertilisation. So that's the bigger picture, how it evolves into standardising it and it becoming a system of work. Mm. Because eventually, you see, what you must have is not a foreigner being the person who is ensuring the standard. It becomes the Estonian who's ensuring the standard. So you've got an Estonian me from birth who comes along and says, that is not very good, I'm going to show you how to do it properly. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes as an advisor, as I've been doing that part, it sometimes feels that you as an advisor, you kind of want the organization you're advising to succeed more than the organization itself. That's sometimes what you can feel, because there is this lack of change, or it doesn't happen in the pace which you kind of see it could happen, and then that's something what kind of also creeps in sometimes.
I think you've said something which stimulates me to make a very important comment. What I had was a passion to make you succeed. It wasn't about me. Mm-hmm. Never been about me. I've always made a point. It's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about you. Now, if you haven't got that passion and people trained, it goes wrong. Because it becomes about me and about I'm in this country doing this because I get extra money. The women are very nice. I like the weather, and I've got good accommodation, etc., blah blah blah. To do this sort of job that you talked about initially, you have to have a passion for them, for those that you are training to succeed. Mm-hmm. Where it goes wrong is you don't have the passion and you do it by the numbers. So when they don't succeed, you just say, well, look, they're just conscripts. So you can also do it within your own army, which has happened and does happen, where there's no passion. They're just conscripts, and you're dismissive of the training. And I've seen that often within the EDF from some quite senior people, and asking the excuse that covers up their ignorance, their lack of understanding, empathy and training. And they just go, they're only conscripts. Well, this is the conscript army, and who's going to fight in a war? You're conscripts. So your argument about they're only conscripts is crazy. So another reason why the Baltic started to fail, if I go back to that subject, was because with the Nordic element becoming bigger, they never had the passion never had the passion.
Mm.
What they had was, and I hate saying this because it is a blanket statement, because obviously there's one or two which were not like this, but the majority of people I saw from the Nordics were only interested in the extra pay and allowances. They were not infantry trainers, so they definitely had no passion about infantry training. When things started to go wrong, and when things start to go wrong, when they can see that the Baltic countries are getting wishing to cut from Baltic, they didn't fight it. Because if I'd been in charge, I would have fought it tooth and nail. Why are we leaving this project? We've done so much. What's the problem from above? Why does Estonia want to go independent?
Mm.
You should do it at some stage, but not yet. Because we haven't evolved. But you have to have passion. There's no passion. Because unfortunately, most of these guys I met, I've got to mention though, a little bit about the new command structure, which I've touched on to explain if I summarise what went wrong. It's now become led by the Nordics. That was a mistake. There's no slander on the Nordics, but the Royal Marines started off, and the infantry training must be on the bottom of the pyramid and not left on the top. And it became what I've often seen in later life. The infantry training is getting thought of last, and this is where it started to go wrong from the Baltic training team perspective with the Nordic element. They are focused on the HQ, and they became the HQ only, and they started to ignore the infantry training. The Nordics had no passion, which is something we've talked about. You have to have passion for this job because there's so many hardships, there's so many things that can tell you why you can't do it. So it's easy to find a reason to give up, especially when you're in an environment where if you don't succeed, you still get the same pay. So it has to be about personal commitment, and the people selected for the job must understand that. If you had a Royal Marine Lieutenant Colonel still in charge of the team, because of the way we're brought up, he'd have always ensured that the training system was in place and everything else that supported it. That's just a harsh fact of life. Big mistake, Royal Marines. You took your finger off the pulse. You were doing well. Unfortunately, because you always do well, you think it's normal. You didn't understand how important this project was. Because there was a double side to this. The Royal Marines not only ensured that there was not a Lieutenant Colonel in charge of the project still, but they started to send junior officers to be on the infantry training team on this project. Because they recognised that you can get great experience from doing this. Absolutely. The trouble is, this job requires great experience beyond just what you're taught, and maturity. Because with this experience and maturity, regardless of rank, you'd have confronted more senior people. So for example, the younger Royal Marine officer would have confronted the Nordic commander and said, "You're letting your finger off the pulse. We're not being supported properly," which did not happen because what I noticed in Estonian uniform when I went to visit once was that the junior Royal Marine officer, was intimidated by the senior rank, and they were started to treat him like a boy. And I think in the end, when he was asked the advice if the training team should leave, when everything else did snowball, he agreed. But he should not have agreed. He should have said, it's wrong. We should stay. We are not the problem. They are not the problem. They're the problem. Get it sorted out. That requires that more of a higher level of experience, which they didn't have.
Moral courage.
Yeah, moral courage, but I don't think this young lad understood that. And these are things which I picked up on later on, which I got told, you know. It's pretty sad that. Yeah, perhaps moral courage.
Because I mean, it's a lot of politics as well, right?
Yeah, a lot of politics, and because that Nordic team became so large, and we're talking a lot of majors and all the rest of it, you know, it's quite easy to be intimidated. I mean, I remember when I was a young Marine, I was just like, you know, so I do get it, and that's why you needed a seasoned major who just go, yeah, okay, not having that.
But that takes balls.
Does take balls as well, you know. So they made a mistake. The Royal Marines also were part of the problem because they started sending out good people, but they were not the right people. Now, of course, this reinforced the doubt that I can only talk from the Estonian point of view, when I came back after being loaned, I came back again in British uniform on the Baltic Bat, and I suddenly actually was treated sometimes with lack of respect. Because guess what? My ranking position and all the rest of it, I did actually earn. I've earned that. That's not just a badge. I fucking earned that. But I never demand respect. But I could see something was wrong. And I was a bit mystified. But when I saw the poor behaviour and example of the let's just say the foreigners, and because the Estonians are starting to learn more, they now see themselves becoming more compatible and comparable. And also, when you don't know a lot, you might think you know more than you do. So this is where this bad attitude crept in, which reinforced we don't need you. So I do get it. I do understand that. So it reinforced the main army, along with the lack of respect now towards the Nord training team, that we don't need you. We can do it ourselves.
It's always the ego, right?
Yeah, egos and shit, yeah.
We know better.
Yeah, we know better. And because you didn't have the strong father attitude to say, listen in, son. So I know if I'd been in the senior position, I'd been straight down to the chod and said, right, what's going on? And if you've got a new chod who's Soviet orientated, I'll just put them in the picture.
Do you think that at the moment that the higher commanders, they don't do politics, but they actually have moral courage to actually say when they see bullshit? I don't think
Actually,
I have no experience.
Okay,
it feels
first
like
of all,
everyone wants to be polite.
I know some do. I know if it goes back, it's the same thing, you know. I'm nothing special. If you've got the knowledge and the experience, yeah, and I'm thinking of somebody right now, and you know him, yeah, and he turned around to another very senior person and said, "Are you fucking crazy?" In fact, he said to him, "Are you a retard?" And I'll one day tell you this privately, yeah. But that's how I would have behaved. I don't care what rank you are. You're a fucking retard saying that to me. You think you can do that? So that's why I still remain optimistic, because I do believe you've got what I refer to as the jigsaw pieces out there. But you better fix it now. Because if you fix it, guess what? You're going to go, they're going to go, and we'll be back to square one.
So we need the no-mans, not the yes-men.
Um,
Because eventually, like, if you don't
okay,
play
I
the
get.
game,
Yeah, okay.
it's hard. It's sometimes
Yeah,
hard to
yeah.
understand like who is playing the game because they still need to want to maintain their influence.
The way I like to describe it is we need moral courage.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
that's
how
the
I
main thing.
describe it.
Yep.
And that's in every army because guess what? Every army is guilty of lack of moral courage. I know that. Some more than others, though. As I said before, the best officer I met in the Corps was Major Ewan Sudbury Taylor, latterly Lieutenant Colonel Ewan Sudbury Taylor, who showed me absolute moral courage. I believe he could have been the Commandant General of the Royal Marines because he had moral courage and would say things which were unpalatable, which were true. He got marked. He was marked down for it, and it's a great shame because he's a great man. But as a young Marine watching him, and I learnt a lot from that. I admire him so much. So and that's why I say moral courage. I think is far harder to find than physical courage. I find a lot of people have physical courage. Mm-hmm. It comes quite okay, not okay. It's not the big deal that it could be compared to moral courage when people just go, I better say yes. If I don't, I'm in trouble. Might lose my career or pay or whatever,
It's about asking those uncomfortable questions that nobody wants to ask.
Yeah, asking the questions and also answering a question with the unpalatable truth.
Yep.
And so getting back to so big. Okay, a weak performance and passion leads to a lack of respect from the other side, and it's a vicious circle. Mm-hmm. You've now got this side, the Nord Baltic, and I had this actually said to me by a Swedish captain, "Oh, you can't train them." Which, yet again, was just an excuse to be lazy. Because to train them you can, there might be some problems, but you've got to solve it because guess what? It's your job to solve. But because they don't want to get out of the office. Also, the company advisor to Alpha Company became a Nordic. So the command structure was, and I'll talk from personal experience now, when I came back, I'm now supervising the training team to train their guys to fill Alpha Company. I saw Alpha Company performing one day and I thought, that's not very good. And I went across there and I started to give some bollockings. And they obviously they heard of me or knew me and were like very careful, but I could see there was a tension because legally it wasn't my responsibility or job. Mm-hmm. It was the Nordic. Whoever made that decision, because if somebody decided, first of all, okay, definitely a Nordic could have been there to advise and be liaison within the headquarters element and the company element. Absolutely. But what I found was because there was so little to do within that sphere, because they are getting more competent, the Nordic, and also whether Nordic isn't that competent himself, when he's going into the company commander's office and saying, "Can I help?" And they're like, "Well, no, actually." But you see, they were very happy to listen to that because they were thought, "Oh, great, I'll go for a coffee." Mm-hmm. And I'd see the guys, because the weather was good, just sat outside drinking coffee all day. And I just thought, what are they doing? But I didn't take it on board then fully that they are the company advisor and they should be doing what I used to do, ensuring a standard. But there was a problem because you see, they had not been taught and they might not even have been infantrymen. So how can they advise and teach when they can't do it themselves? You can't supervise, can you? Which we talked about before. They can't supervise in their supervisory position because they cannot do the job themselves. So they took the easy option. They also had very good paying conditions because they got paid to live in hotels every weekend. and they got massive extra money. So they had no passion, and they saw it as just a job to make money and go home. So that's part of that vicious cycle where both sides learn to distrust each other. Yeah, pretty sad, really.
So I would end it in a way where, or I would summarize it that, at least for me, is like just don't get lazy. Laziness doesn't really build standards, and standards don't only show through physical actions.
Well, lazy is an anathema to me. You can't lazy. What you know, I can't compute that word. Because you see, if that's the case, you see, because if you got the proper system, the Nordic commander should have been to Paldiski, seen things going wrong, and he gets sacked.
Mm-hmm.
Because if my boss had came to Paldiski and he saw me or a poor standard, guess what? If he would have told me to get it fixed, or he thought I couldn't fix it, guess what? I'm getting sacked that day, and I'm getting replaced. So it goes back to other things. So I started to see, now I understand now what I saw within the Nordic battalion staff was some of the problems that I started to see in the EDF when I joined it. Supervisors who can't supervise because they can't do it. No passion for infantry training. So I think that gave the rationale to prove it, that when they cut adrift and went from Alpha Company Baltic Battalion to Alpha Company Scout Battalion, how both sides could naturally part without any massive diplomatic incident. That's my personal take on it. And that's sad, because as we now understand that if the Baltic Battalion project had continued properly, it would have been legally and systematically integrated into the Estonian army. So what the Chod now can envisage should happen would have happened 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So apart from that, everything's pretty good.
Very good. So I would say, to conclude, like holding a standard is a form of showing that you care. If you don't hold the standard and if you don't speak out, it means that you don't care.
It means you either don't care or don't know, or both.
Well,
but often when you don't know, you don't care, do you? So it's a cycle of shit. Another what I call it. If you don't know, you don't care.
Well, and I would say that the actual war eventually doesn't care if you were ignorant or not. You're still in war.
War doesn't care that you're not trained. War's going to kill you for not being trained.
Exactly. So don't use the...
So they're not going to say, oh, the poor guy wasn't trained to do that. Okay, the bullet will stop here. Shrapnel, go back. No, you're dead meat, mate.
That's how life works.
And that's why I hate saying this. In fact, I say it another way. A very good guy, his lieutenant colonel then, I explained all these problems to him. He said to me, yes, you are right. He said, but in times of war, we may lose 50%, but we will learn quickly. I said to him, why don't we start training properly now and not lose 50%? I then left him with this. How about every time I trained the Iraq platoon with my fantastic Estonian team, who'd been trained to a standard and supervised, that if every other man on that platoon came back in a plastic bag, do you think that's acceptable? And of course, he understood then that what he said was terrible. Because you see that he had a real image of real time. And can you imagine we send 30 guys to Iraq every 6 months and 30 guys come back in, or 15 guys come back in bags? Can you imagine the shit that would cause?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's what another reason why I feel passionate about it is because if you don't train, you people die because of it. And it goes back to that comment I made about if you had senior guys at a high level like the Baltic Brigade, the senior commanders would actually now suffer the consequences of losses if their guys weren't trained. And that's why before they go or when they come back because they've learnt the hard way, they will be the world's biggest bastards to make sure you train properly because they suffered it. And that's why within my system it is stayed strict because everybody's been to war. So that's the big X factor that we talked about earlier. If you've been to war, it is another reinforcement of why we must train hard.
Mm-hmm. Everyone knows.
So, yeah. So I hope what I said today makes sense because there's a lot more to it actually.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that sums it up and there's many lessons to be learned from that. And I just hope that if any British guys listen to this, you can understand that we actually had built a fantastic machine that happened out there which nobody seems to have understood or known about from both sides.
Well, there is still possibility to open the eyes.
Well, there is because there are eyes open who actually did experience this.
Mm-hmm.
And now, fortunately, they're in senior positions to do something about it. So my message to them is do something about it.
Yeah, when future will show. All right.
You know? Okay.
Thanks, mate.
Right. Great talking to you. And right.
Speak to you soon.
Yeah, and you. Bye.
Bye-bye.